Alright, today I want to do something a little differently than what we normally do on the channel. I'm typically very Commander focused, but after having a conversation about the state of Modern with a few friends of mine, I want to try to get more of you into playing Modern. Now, for those who don't know, Modern is the 60-card format for Magic the Gathering that allows 4 cards in your deck of any one kind, except basic lands. You obviously get as many of those as you want, and the list of cards available is all the way from the Mirrodin block till now. That's like 20 years of Magic the Gathering stuff you have available. Now, unfortunately, one of the biggest problems with trying to get people into Modern has been the price of Modern. And there are some people, some of you even in my comment section, who have tried to defend the price of Modern, saying that it's a good thing that people are not able to play this format until they have a $1,000 deck. Every one of you is wrong that says that. Just gonna go ahead and throw that out there. I think it's important for people to have not only a deck that they can afford to play, but a deck that they can slowly build up over time. It makes no sense to me to bar Modern from play for like a year while somebody spends $40 every month getting a single card until the deck is assembled. I'd rather them be able to have a deck they can play and then slowly upgrade over time. That makes a lot more sense to me. That way, the investment they put into their deck is a worthwhile investment. They're not all cards are going to abandon, and it's a skeleton of a deck they'll be able to use for a long time. So, to facilitate this video, I've got 2 decks I want to talk about. One of them is going to be cheaper than the other, but the other one has proven long-form stability in the format, though the former is going to be one of my personal favorites. That said, let's get right into the first of these 2 decks. As I mentioned, one of the big problems with Modern is the price point of Modern. If you look at the price of pretty much any one of these decks, $500 is your minimum. After that, you're starting to get into the hundreds of, and even sometimes thousands dollars range for multiples of these decks. This means that you end up having to invest a lot of time and money into a single deck, and if you don't end up liking that deck, then you're just kind of screwed. This is not sustainable for any card game. This is not good for any card game. You need people to have some kind of way to onboard on, and as there are no starter decks or budget options available for Modern players that are available from Wizards of the Coast, we kind of have to make do with making our own. Now, there are people who do a really good job at this and a far better job at this than I do, Saffron Olive being one of them. But I wanted to take my crack at it as well to show some of these decks that you can run to get started. The benefit of at least this one, this budget Affinity deck, is that it has a very easy upgrade path. If you look up the decks that are currently performing in the format that are Affinity decks, you'll find the cards that you need to use to upgrade these decks. It'll end up running you about $400 to do the upgrade, but you can play my version of the deck, this base version, for $50. Now, what is an Affinity deck? Well, Affinity decks center around these low-cost creatures. This Ornithopter here is a zero-cost creature, and it is going to be one of the ways we plan to win the game, supported by another zero-cost creature in Memnite, and other zero-cost creatures in the form of creatures that have Affinity for artifacts. Affinity for artifacts says that a card will cost 1 less for every artifact you control, so most of the lands in our deck will be artifacts, and almost every card in our deck will be an artifact. This does, however, mean that our deck will be weak to anti-artifact style strategies. Cards like Haywire Might can disrupt us, but them's the breaks. When you're playing Modern, you are not playing the strongest deck of all time. You are playing a rock, paper, scissors match with everybody else randomly picking the other items. Sometimes you end up having a better matchup, sometimes you have a worse matchup, but let's get into how this deck functions. As I said, it functions trying to get the Affinity for artifacts going. So your early turns are going to be set up by dropping down cards like Ornithopter and Memnite, followed up by cards like Frogmite, which should be able to come down on turn 2 easily enough, along with cards like Frogmere Enforcer, which can either be a 1-mana Frogmite or a 7-mana Sojourner's Companion if you need it to. The Companion can also sacrifice itself out of the hand in order to, or cycle itself out of the hand in order to grab any artifact land from your deck if you need, and we should be able to keep our hand flowing with cards like Thought Monitor and Thought Cast. As a result, this version of the deck is running 4 Ornithopter, 4 Memnite, 4 Thought Monitor, 4 Sojourner's Companion, 4 Frogmere Enforcer, and 2 Frogmites, for a total of 22 creatures. We are only running a single copy of Thoughtcast, though, because Thoughtcast has had an older brother, or a younger brother, rather, that has come out recently, called Kozilek's Unsealing, and we will be running 3 of these. Kozilek's Unsealing comes down for 3 mana, and says anytime we cast a creature spell with mana value 4, 5, or 6, we will make 2 01 Eldrazi spawns. These can be used for a variety of purposes. One, they can give us mana to cast stronger spells, or they can be used to block aggro decks from getting in and killing us if we need the chump blockers that are non-artifacts that we will not hurt for losing. But if we can cast creatures with mana value 7 or greater, of which we have 1, 2, 3, technically 12, then we will draw 3 cards, allowing us to effectively storm through our own deck. But what is all of this for? Getting a bunch of 4 power creatures on the board is a game-winning strategy. It's how Crashing Footfalls won as many games as it did back in the day, but we need to do a little better than that. So to facilitate a little more power, we are going to be running 2 copies of Cranial Plating, 3 copies of Cranial Ram, and 2 copies of Nettlecyst. Each of these have the same sort of effect. They will equip a creature and give it 1/1 or 1/0 or X plus 1, where that is the number of artifacts we control. So if we have an artifact land, an artifact creature, and one of these cards, that's automatically going to be 3 power onto anything that we have. Cranial Ram and Nettlecyst are notable because they actually have living weapons, so they will create a creature on the board automatically that will have the stats that we need. Cards like Cranial Ram and Cranial Plating have a little bit of extra utility to them as well if you look at their colored mana. So while the Ram cannot be cast for colorless like most cards in our deck, it needs Rakdos mana, the Plating can be equipped for 1 or can be equipped for 2 black mana. Now, sometimes this doesn't look very intuitive, but the reason this exists is, let me paint you a scenario. Let's say that you have an Ornithopter on the board, and this is equipped with a Cranial Plating. There's another Ornithopter on your board separate to it, and you swing with both. Your opponent has a Murktide Regent, and they block your Ornithopter that has the Cranial Plating to protect themselves so they don't lose the game. In response, at instant speed, you can pay 2 black mana to attach the Cranial Plating to the unblocked Ornithopter, leading to a victory. The whole reason that there's 2 equip costs on Cranial Plating is one is at sorcery speed and one is at instant speed. Speaking of equipments, we also have 2 Lava Spur Boots to give a little bit of protection to our creatures and also give them haste. Dropping a whole bunch of cards on the board is nutty. Dropping a Thought Monitor on the board followed by a Cranial Plating is great, but if it doesn't have haste, then we're not going to be winning the game off that immediately. Lava Spur Boots allows us to get in there and do just that. Next, we have 3 Spring Leaf Drums. These will allow us to filter our mana, and they come down very, very early, allowing us to ramp as well using our 0-cost creatures, followed by a single copy of Moonsnare Prototype, which does the same thing, but it can tap an untapped artifact we control, like, say, our Cranial Rams or Nettlecysts, instead of having to rely on creatures to generate its colorless mana. In a pinch, we can also channel it by paying 5 mana to throw a non-land permanent somewhere around where we need it. Say our opponent has a Leyline of the Guild Pact, and they're about to beat our face in with a Scion of Draco. We can depower the Scion of Draco and trade with it with some of our cards if a Moonsnare Prototype is throwing the Leyline away. So that is why this card is in here as far as I'm concerned. Where our land base is concerned, we are running 4 Darksteel Citadels and 4 Treasure Vaults, as they are colorless mana that are also untapped artifact lands. The other untapped artifact lands that we used to exist in Modern are all banned in Modern now, so we don't have access to those. We also are running a bunch of tapped lands because they serve double duty for us with our Affinity stuff. So Mistvault Bridge, Drossforge Bridge, and Silver Bluff Bridge are all being ran in sets of 3. This will allow us to have access to all of our deck's mana and also constantly be filling the board more with artifacts that are harder and harder to remove. Now, as you upgrade this deck, these lands will be replaced by cards like Glimmer Void and Urza's Saga, but for the budget version of the deck, these will increase your affinity count very, very quickly. We are also running a single swamp and a single island so that we have access to basic lands in case our opponents hit us with something like like Boseiju early on. We want to have something that is searchable, that is basic, so that no matter what the removal type, whether it be Assassin's Trophy, Path to Exile, or Boseiju, we have access to a searchable card that can grab us our stuff. The only reason we're not running another one of these, a red colored mana, is because we only really have one card that truly needs that mana, and that's the Cranial Ram. Another thing you're going to have to get used to in a 60 card format is the fact that we have a sideboard. Since games in 60 card formats are done as 2 out of 3 games, you need to make sure that you have ways of dealing with your opponent's stuff. So to facilitate that, we've got a 15 card sideboard to deal with various things in the format. If we end up in a trading mid-range style of game, Metallic Rebukes can come in to give us the edge there. If we are dealing with graveyard decks like, say, the Oliphant Living End decks that used to be a thing, and scam decks that, aren't anywhere near as powerful now that Grief is also gone, cards like Nihil Spellbomb and Tormod's Crypt can keep those decks in check. If we are dealing with Tron decks, cards like Pithing Needle and Damping Sphere will be important, because Pithing Needle can turn off Karn, and the Damping Sphere can cause all of the Tron lands to tap only for 1 mana. The Damping Sphere also will punish a player for casting more than 1 spell a turn, meaning this also gives us a way to deal with the Energy and Storm decks that like casting spells in sets of 2s and 3s. Finally, in order to disrupt decks like Domain, we've got cards like Aether Spellbomb and Null Elemental Blast. Null Elemental Blast can counter any multicolored spell or blow up any multicolored permanent like Leyline of the Guild Pact or Territorial Kavu, and the Aether Spellbomb can be used to return any creature to its owner's hand if we are dealing with an aggro matchup that we have to disrupt so that we can survive it in case we can't personally outspeed it. The benefit of cards like this, though, is also the fact that they will be able to come down and help our affinity number go up, irrespective of the utility of the card. Do note, though, as you upgrade the deck and increase the amount of cards like Urza's Saga in it, these 2-ubs that are in the deck will slowly go down to 1-ubs, because it will be better to have single copies of cards that can be tutored up with the Urza's Saga as opposed to increasing your chances of drawing them by running multiple copies. But that just comes down to what'll happen as you upgrade the deck. Now, I want to go ahead and go through a quick example of how to play this deck. So when you're playing any game of Modern, any deck in Modern, you need to recognize that it is a turn 4 format. This means that any deck you are playing needs to be stabilized or flat out winning by the time turn 4 rolls around. So when we're mulliganing, we want to make sure that we've got plays on turns 1, 2, 3, and 4. In our case with our hand, we only have plays from turn 2 going onward, but that might not hurt us because the top end of our hand is actually very good. We have a Thought Monitor, Sojourner's Companion, and a Frogmere Enforcer, and plenty of artifact lands to get us going. So we're going to go ahead and say we keep this hand and we're on the play so we don't get to draw. We'll drop a Treasure Vault on the board and then go to the next turn. We have a Mist Vault Bridge, so either we can drop this down and cast the Cranial Plating next turn, or we can go ahead and play this Darksteel Citadel, tap 2, and play our Cranial Plating. Once we get to the next turn, we have a Memnite, so now we have a target for the Cranial Plating, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 artifacts. So our Thought Monitor is discounted by 4 already. This means this card will cost us 3 mana. So we can actually just play an island and tap 1, 2, 3, drop the Thought Monitor down, and draw 2 cards. Instead of playing the Cranial Plating on the Memnite, we're going to go ahead and bank on the Thought Monitor being our important card. So the next turn comes around, and we can go ahead and drop another artifact land on the board, giving us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 artifacts on the board. If we pay a single mana and get a Lava Spur Boots out, we can then pay 1 more mana and get the Sojourner's Companion out, and now we have 7 cards worth of Affinity, so we can just drop the Frogmere Enforcer on the board for free. This means when we tap this Treasure Vault, we can equip the Cranial Plating to our Thought Monitor, and it now has a power of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus it's 2. Our Thought Monitor is now swinging on turn 4 for 11. This means that if our opponent does not deal with the Thought Monitor immediately, we will be winning the game on the following turn. If we are dealing with a Murktide Regent style deck, then the Murktide Regent has lost all of its power, as we can just trade the Thought Monitor with it. This is another example of a keepable hand. We have a Darksteel Citadel and a Treasure Vault, then we have a Mistvault Bridge. Each of these lands will be able to get us what we need in the following turns, and we have a turn to play. We can play our Moonsnare prototype. A turn late because of the tapped land, but it will still work out in our favor because we have 2 Thought Monitors to wombo off of later on in the game. So let's say we're going first, we drop the Mistvault Bridge down, and then when our opponent takes their turn, our turn comes up, we have a Memnite. So we can play the Memnite, play the Treasure Vault, tap the Mistvault Bridge to drop the Moonsnare prototype, and now we have 4 artifacts and access to 4 mana in the following turn. So we can't do much here except sit and wait, so we go to turn 3. Turn 3 gives us another Mistvault Bridge. Now we have a decision to make. If our opponent has something like a Murktide Regent or another Flyer or a Darcy, and we need to defend ourselves, then the goal is going to be drop the Thought Monitor down now. If they don't, and we can just make a threatening board state, then we drop this Mistvault Bridge down because we don't necessarily care too much about it coming into play tapped, and we go ahead and tap for 3 mana to play the Nettlecyst. The Nettlecyst will create a Germ token that has a power and toughness of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On turn 3, we have a 6/6 creature. This will allow us to threaten anything our opponents have. If we are fighting a domain deck and they have a Territorial Kavu, we can now trade with the Territorial Kavu. We can now trade with most things in the format that don't have flying. When the following turn comes up, we have the ability to get 1 bit of mana this way to play a Kozilek's Unsealing. This will go ahead and give us the ability to go forward with an incredibly strong turn. Kozilek's Unsealing is out after paying 1, 2, 3 mana. Now, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 artifacts on the board, we only have to tap the Mistvault Bridge to play the Thought Monitor. Kozilek's Unsealing will trigger, Thought Monitor will trigger, and we will draw not 2, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards, letting us drop an Ornithopter on the board as well for free, and a Sojourner's Companion on the board as well for free. Now, if our Nettlecyst token hasn't been taken out, we have a Nettlecyst token that is a power of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, an 11/11 Germ token. But there's more. We had a Kozilek's Unsealing and dropped a Sojourner's Companion, so we get to draw 1, 2, 3 more cards. While we can't play these cards as of right now, we are at the end of our combos, but we do have, as of this moment, a 7-card hand, a board state that has an 11/11 creature, a 4/4 blocker, and 2 flying chump blockers that can be made really powerful in the following turn. So if we go to turn 5, where we should be able to just win the game, we drop the Welding Jar down, we drop the Darksteel Citadel down, and we play the Cranial Plating. Now we have the ability to equip the Cranial Plating and the Nettlecyst to either the Thought Monitor or the Ornithopter, causing them to swing for over 25 damage, irrespective of which one we choose. This means that we stabilized on turn 4 and had the ability to punch for game on turn 5. This is what you want to see in any modern deck. Now, obviously, this is a very weak version of this deck, but as you are only spending $50, this will still be an effective way to play. And that about does it for the Affinity deck. That's not the only deck I want to talk about, but I want to go ahead and let you know that if you play this deck, you're gonna have a lot of fun. And again, the upgrade paths for it are very easy. You'll be able to find deck lists online that show you how to change the mana to put things like Haywire Might in, put Urza's Sagas in, put a Shadow Spear in, put experimental synthesizers in, so that instead of cards like Nettlecyst and Cranial Ram and Cranial Plating, you can rely on Urza's constructs to do the work for you. But this version of the deck will be able to function on its own until you're able to afford those cards. And I think being able to play the entire deck for the cost of a single copy of Urza's Saga Once Upon a Time is not a bad deal. But let's talk about the next deck. Now, if you've not played against a Tron deck before or want to know what they're all about, the basic strategy is this. You are trying to assemble these lands: Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower, because each of these gives 1 mana on their own, but if they are all on the board, they will give a combined total of 7 mana. This means that on turn 3, you will be able to have 7 mana, which is enough to have access to very powerful haymaker game-swinging cards. Tron is the quintessential tempo deck. It wants to be on the back foot for turns 1 through 3, and then finally come out swinging on turns end of 3 or 4 or 5. This is perfect for Modern, as Modern is a turn 4 format. Now, the main thing you are trying to get in this deck is a Karn the Great Creator. Karn says that activated abilities of artifacts you control can't be activated. It can turn non-creature artifacts into creatures that have power and toughness equal to their mana value, or it can be used to choose an artifact you own from outside the game or exile and put that card in your hand. To facilitate this, our sideboard is doubling as a Karn wish board on top of everything else. So we can use Karn to get Elixir of Immortality to deal with any kind of mill deck, Engineered Explosives to deal with aggro decks, Haywire Might to deal with Leyline of the Guild Pact or any other type of enchantment we are having trouble with, Liquid Metal Coating, which can be used to deal with the mirror match. Liquid Metal Coating can turn our opponent's Tron lands into artifacts, and then we can just kill them with Karn. Stone of Eric and Tormod's Crypt, so we have access to ways to deal with graveyard decks. Stone Brain to deal with combo and tempo decks that rely heavily on singular cards. Pithing Needle, which can be used to stop any activated abilities. Oblivion Stone, which gives us access to another board wipe. Sundering Titan, which can be used to punish any land-heavy decks. And Sculpting Steel, which can be used to take our opponent's copies of the One Ring, among other cards. Karn will be able to get all of these anytime that we need him to, and that is the whole reason we are running Karn. He is the leader of the show of any Tron deck. We are also running a single copy of Ugin the Ineffable, who can give all of our colorless spells 2 mana worth of discounts. He can also give us the ability to manifest the top card of our deck, kind of, sort of. Exile the top card of our library face down and look at it, create a 2/2 colorless spirit token. When that token leaves the battlefield, put the exiled card into our hand. It's not quite manifest, but it's kind of, sort of, really kind of close. Then we have the ability to neg him by 3 to blow up any permanent that is 1 or more colors, letting us deal with problematic cards on the board. We also have a 17-card creature package, and each of our creatures is trying to do something very specific. Devourer of Destiny lets us get rid of problematic cards later on in the game, while also giving us the ability to sculpt our hand, giving us a pre-game action. And this is why we'll be running 4 of these. Endbringer is being ran in copies of 2 because it can be used as a pseudo replacement to the One Ring, giving us access to repeated card draw over multiple turns. We can also use it to kill creatures that have 1 toughness if that ends up coming up in certain games. Also, if you really want to be cheeky, you can go up to 4 Endbringer, put a Basilisk Collar in your sideboard, and then use him to snipe any creature no matter what the toughness is. Then we have 2 Kozilek the Broken Reality. This will give you an instant board state of 4 creatures by exiling 2 cards from each player's hand, and also giving all your colorless creatures 3/2. If we drop this on the board, we will be winning the game in the following turn, almost guaranteed. 4 copies of Sowing Mica Spawn give us more access to our Tron lands, so we can search them out of the library. We can also use this to kill problematic lands from the board. Wormcoil Engine gives us access to anti-aggro in the form of a Death Touch lifelink blocker that can split itself into multiple pieces if it happens to die. A World Breaker gives us access to another way of removing problematic cards from the board, and we can also sacrifice a land to put this from our graveyard back to our hand, which combos really well with our Sowing Mica Spawn that is constantly giving us free lands throughout the game. Then we have a Thought-Knot Seer, 2 copies of these. Thought-Knot Seer allows us to look at an opponent's hand, take a card away from it, and exile the card, and if this card leaves the battlefield, an opponent will draw a card. While he's not the most important piece of our strategy, he can disrupt our opponent's strategies. As for our Tron lands, we are also running 2 copies of Sylvan Scrying, 4 copies of Expedition Map, and 4 copies of Ancient Stirring to try to get those lands to our hand. And that's honestly probably the most important thing we can do in any game. If we can't get those lands to our hand, we are also running 4 copies of Talisman of Resilience, which will allow us to turn 2 ramp so that on turn 3 we can play Karn, regardless of whether or not we have our our Tron lands. We're also running 2 chromatic spheres, as they give us access to mana filtering and a little bit of deck digging, and 2 copies of All Is Dust so that we can deal with aggro strategies. Then all that's left is getting our 4 of each Urza's lands on the board. We are also running 6 forests and 2 copies of Sanctum of Ugin. Whenever we cast a colorless spell with converted mana 7 or greater, we can sacrifice this to search our library for any colorless creature, reveal it, and put it into our hand. If we are dealing with an aggro deck, we are likely grabbing Wormcoil Engine. If we are dealing with a combo deck, we are likely going to be getting the Thought Knot Seer. And if we are instead dealing with a deck that needs to be put down like a dead dog, then we are going to be grabbing Kozilek and dropping it on the board and winning the game instantly. All in all, this means the deck will come up to a total cost of $140, which is nowhere near as cheap as the other deck that we mentioned already before, but this is, unlike Affinity, a shell of a very, very powerful mainstay of Modern. If you have not played this deck already, getting it assembled will never end up being a bad investment, as the deck basically lives forever. Tron, in whether it's Eldrazi form, green form, or blue form, always has some kind of place in the Modern meta. But now let's get into how to actually play the deck. Like with last time, let's look at an example of a keepable hand, and we are looking at one right now. We have green mana in our forest, we have an Urza's Mine and an Urza's Tower, and a Sylvan Scrying, so we will be able to get to our cards very, very early. We're also opening up with a Devourer of Destiny as a pre-game action, so we have the ability to sculpt our first draw. So let's go ahead and show our opponents that, and look at our top 4 cards. We have an Endbringer, Ancient Stirrings, Chromatic Sphere, and a Forest. We're going to go ahead and grab the Ancient Stirrings so that we are guaranteed to have good plays throughout the rest of the match. We exile the other cards, put the Devourer of Destiny back in our hand, and then when the next turn comes up, let's go ahead and say that we are on the play. So we're going to go ahead and play that Forest, tap it, get that Ancient Stirrings ability, and look at the top 5 of our deck, and see what we want to see. We have a Karn the Great Creator, that's what we want, so we're gonna go ahead and move the other ones to the bottom of the library. We do not need anything else. We have our Tron, and we have our Karn, so we are basically set for the rest of the game. Ancient Stirrings goes to the graveyard, next turn comes up, we go ahead and play our Urza's Mine, tap the Forest and the Urza's Mine, play the Sylvan Scrying, and now we can go ahead and get the Urza's card that we are missing. When the next turn comes up, we go ahead and play our Urza's Tower and look at our hand to see what options we have. It's looking like the best thing we can do is play the Expedition map, tap 2, crack the Expedition map, and grab ourselves another Urza's Tower out of the deck. Once turn 4 comes up, we have a Talisman of Resilience, so we're going to go ahead and play our Urza's Power Plant and take a look at what the board has. If our opponent has a problematic card on the board that the World Breaker or Devourer of Destiny or the Ugin can get rid of, we will be casting that. If they don't, then we'll be casting Karn the Great Creator and going and tutoring something out of our sideboard. At this point, we have definitely stabilized. As an example of what we are going to do, though, we are going to go ahead and play Ugin for the grand total of 6 mana, and then because he does discount all of our colorless spells, we can play the Talisman of Resilience for free, and then we can tap 2 and get the Thought Knot Seer on the board, and the Thought Knot Seer will allow us to disrupt our opponent. We also, if we wanted to, could have dropped down the Karn the Great Creator and tutored off of that if we so chose. Honestly, it just depends on what your matchup is looking like. As another example of a keepable hand, we have 2 of our Urza's lands in Mine and Power Plant, and we have a Devourer of Destiny to sculpt our hand. So we're going to pre-game action that Devourer of Destiny, look at the top 4 cards of our deck, and we see that we have an Ancient Stirrings to sculpt ourselves further. So we're going to take that Ancient Stirrings and put it on the top of the deck, and the other ones are going to go to exile. As much as we don't want to lose the Kozilek, we do have to lose the Kozilek. So, when our turn begins, we will go ahead and draw that Ancient Stirrings, and we're going to go ahead and gamble a little bit. We're going to drop down the Urza's Mine first and see what happens. I'm kidding. We're going to be playing the Forest, tapping it, playing the Ancient Stirrings, and we're going to look at the top 5 cards of our deck to see if we can get the next Urza's land. We don't have it, so instead we're going to grab the Talisman of Resilience. As much as I would like to take that Karn, we don't actually have the ability to do anything with it as of right now. So we're going to go ahead and throw all of these to the bottom of the library, and now we have a turn to play. So we go ahead and end our turn. Our Ancient Stirrings goes away. The next turn comes up, and we have another Urza's Mine. So we'll play the Power Plant, tap 2, and we'll drop a Talisman of Resilience on the board, which will set us up for the Sowing Mica Spawn when the next turn comes around. That next turn comes around, we're on turn 3. We drew another Power Plant that we can't really use, so we're going to play the Urza's Mine, tap 4, and we're going to go ahead and get that Sowing Mica Spawn on the board. This will allow us to get the next Tron land out of our deck, and we are now live. While it does put the Urza's Tower on the battlefield untapped, unfortunately we don't have a follow-up play, so we just have to sit behind our 3/3 that will likely die blocking and trying to stabilize for us. Our next turn comes up, we have a Talisman of Resilience, we can go ahead and play the Urza's Mine, and now we have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 mana. So we can go ahead and open up, getting our Ugin the Ineffable on the board. This will discount a lot of cards, so our Talisman of Resilience is now free, and it will discount our Devourer of Destiny as well, letting us tap out to get that out, and we can go ahead... We can then use Ugin to destroy any permanent that is 1 or more colors, letting us stabilize even further. Now, while we are not in a dominant position, we have been able to claw ourselves away from a bad position. So, the next turn comes up, we draw another Urza's Land, which isn't the greatest for us, but we do have a good board state to work with, so we are able to continue on forward. We will likely be pressing the attack with Devourer of Destiny up until the point where we have something else. If we lose from here, though, then we lose from here, and we go into game 2, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And with that, that should just about do it. If you want to get into Modern, both of these decks are at very different price points, and they both have very obvious upgrade paths that are all available publicly on sites like MTG Goldfish if you need that information for you. For my part, my goal here is to try to make affordable decks that people can play. That's way easier to do in Commander, where there's more of a gentleman's agreement about power, but in Modern, everybody is playing the most powerful things they always can. So there is no gentleman's agreement. There is just play well, play hard, and do your best. So hopefully everything that I've talked about here will help facilitate those kind of games. If you have not played Modern, please try the Affinity deck, as it is very, very cheap and very, very fun. It's a very fun format, honestly. I just wish more people could afford to play it. That said, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here. Ravelern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying that's part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one.